Okay, I call to order the April 14th Transportation and Transit Commission meeting. First item on the agenda is the March meeting minutes. Did everyone have a chance to review the March minutes? Someone like to make a motion to approve the March minutes?
I make a motion to approve. This is Troy.
There a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? The March minutes are approved. Next item is public appearances for non-agenda items. Is anyone on the call or in the room here for non-agenda items? No, sir, there's not. Okay, thank you. Next item is a couple of review items from prior meetings. Metro Transit Review and Lacie Road and South Saline Railroad improvements. And I'll defer to Andrew for an update on those.
Thanks. Sorry, I am getting used to this, so forgive me. Yeah, so first up, Metro Transit. Metro is proposing using a one-time pot of some rescue federal CARES money to basically create an escrow account for each partner that is currently partnering with them with transit services. Partners would pay a base rate plus 3% increases. And I guess the big takeaway here is that they'd be using this big pot of money to ease some of the ebbs and flows that we had kind of been experiencing in previous years. And so with that, there would be kind of a fixed minimum based on some percentage of our 2019 service hours. And then if a partner dips below that, they'd still be required to pay a base rate. And then if a partner terminates service, those remaining funds would be distributed to the remaining partners. And so, they started getting this together kind of the last 2 months and kind of been presenting us with, starting to get some of the details polished up. And I just kind of want to mention it to you guys that we'll probably have a more formalized proposal, and you can anticipate that either in the May or the June TTC meeting. So, I think that's kind of some of the biggest news for Metro Transit. And so I think on the win from that would be, some more kind of known costs and using this federal money, this kind of one-time thing to kind of ease some of their concerns and kind of not necessitate a longer-term contract with partners, and kind of, so it's a kind of a win-win in a lot of ways, but I still don't have all the details yet, and so we'll be kind of finalizing that, or kind of what the agreement should look like to be presented to you guys in the next 2 months. And then separate news on Metro Transit, we did, last time we met, we had Metro present, and then we had another public meeting. We've also received 34 responses so far from our transit survey, and I'm just going to pull that up really fast to kind of show you guys what that looks like, because we didn't get a chance last time. And so what you see here is our public service. Oh, you can see it, awesome. Public transportation service webpage. And so we have both the Madison Metro survey here, which looks like this. And so they are running concurrently. Madison Metro is using this survey to kind of assess their network redesign. And then we have our own survey. Oh, well, that's always, and then the link broke. Hopefully I can fix it. Fitchburg sponsored survey is here. And so I just want to kind of let everybody know that it's out there. We're still taking comments kind of through the end of April, and we're going to be talking with Metro staff towards the end of April about kind of what we learned and what some of the scenarios that they're looking at, kind of a preview of some of those scenarios. So just some questions, really trying to keep it brief. I think the biggest thing that we're trying to learn is, what this ridership to coverage trade-off is, and what are some of the things that we could do to improve transportation, public transportation in Fitchburg. And with that, I can kind of share real fast some initial results. So, for example, when you think about ridership coverage trade-off, what do you think the priority should be? So right now, we definitely have a slight, or the majority of folks that have responded have indicated a slight ridership preference.
Andrew, can you remind me what that means?
Yeah.
What does it mean to favor ridership over coverage?
Sure. Definitely. I will. I think it's probably best said through a slide. So ridership is kind of focusing any increases or kind of doubling down on the routes we do have. And so this is kind of what Metro explained a little bit last time, but so it would be increasing frequency on some of these main corridors, kind of at the expense of offering higher coverage that we wouldn't be as readily accessible to be picked up at any of these kind of local streets, but we would have much more frequent service, potentially during longer periods of the day on the main routes. Whereas the coverage goal focuses more on just kind of making sure that everybody's within, X number, a quarter mile of a transit route. But this comes at the expense potentially of some frequency, and so you might be looking at, half hour or an hour between transit vehicles. So that's kind of the trade-off. With the same number of vehicles, you can either kind of put them all on a few routes where you're most likely to get ridership, or you can kind of spread them out. And so based on the initial results, folks kind of slightly favor this sort of doubling down, but there's still more time, and really we want to not just get kind of this, we want to get kind of a general sense, but we also want to get some of that specific. So certainly a lot of those comments are helpful. So any other questions?
Yeah, I don't, it's probably changing the subject a little bit maybe. Isn't Fitchburg doing what was called an options analysis or an options study? And where is that? Where are we with that?
I mean, right now we're kind of letting, stop sharing my screen. We're kind of deferring to the Metro Transit. They have kind of this ongoing study going on for their ridership. I guess the point of our two first kind of public meetings in this survey is to understand what kind of complementary transit should be provided. So there's not really a formal study right now, but I guess we're using the results of this to kind of talk about, depending upon where Metro Transit goes, what sorts of options should we be looking at to kind of fill the gaps, if necessary. So I wish I had more right now, but right now it's kind of the data collection time period.
All right.
And Andrew, sorry if I missed it, but do you know how much longer the survey is going to be open?
Yeah, so I have opened through the end of April. I don't know about the Metro Transit. They didn't have any information on that, but we are meeting with Metro on the 29th. So if folks can get any of that stuff in by, I'm asking for the 27th, that'll give us a little bit of time to process it and provide that to Metro while they go through some of their alternatives. Because I think they're going to create 4 network alternatives to kind of show the public. But we have kind of a preview of that and a chance to inform that. So.
Andrew, Troy, what will the follow-up to the ride share program that we had for a while, is that on hold until everything else is decided?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I think that's definitely one of the options we're talking about. Of let's say Metro redesigns their network and cuts a route or two, right? And then that would give us a little bit more information of, okay, now how viable would a rideshare system be and where should it go and what should the details be, that sort of thing. So I think that's kind of why we're letting them, start to set that stage, and then hopefully we'll know more about what metro transit routes are going to look like in at least 2022, 23. So hopefully that helps. But that's kind of why we're doing these concurrently. So start now, so we'll have the data by the time that comes out and we can make a decision. Does that help?
Yep.
So then, are there any other questions about the Metro Transit Review? If not, the second review item was the Lacie Road and South Side Railroad improvements. And I'll refer back to Andrew for an update on that.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. So, sharing my screen again. So this gives you a quick preview of what we're currently looking at from a redesign of that intersection. So this was an amendment to TID 4 to add $880,000 for railway improvements to provide a quiet zone associated with not just this location, but from basically Irish through Clayton Road. And so for this specific project, we have $880K to do a few things. Right now, what we're kind of, we don't have anything official right now, but we will by next month, and that we might have to get this before the next TTC, and that's why I'm really bringing it up now. Mainly from a point of, if you want to weigh in on it, we might want to reschedule next month's meeting before we would have to get a final approval. Mainly because the end of the encumber period is on the 27th, and so we might be able to make that, if we get council approval on the 25th, we might still be able to get that expenditure set up, but we're shooting for the 11th. So I guess I bring it up, I'll preview everything, but know that why we're bringing it up now is kind of a preview for what we're going to bring up in the next month. But there's kind of three elements. The first is a traffic signal, and this would allow for the traffic signal on the crossing to be kind of coordinated so that you would have preemption there at the crossing gates. When a rail comes, that you basically be able to change the signal around so that folks could clear through, but you wouldn't be allowing a left or right turns into that before the railway gets there. Railroad gets there. Second is crossing gates. So we would have at least 2 crossing gates here. We'd be rebuilding these with, and then building this median that would prevent people from kind of going around the existing crossing gates. And then along with that, because those crossing gates are pretty big, we'd be doing some undergrounding of the overhead electrical lines above that and then connecting that. So it's roughly 2,000 feet of undergrounding there. So that kind of collectively is those kind of 3 contracts is what we'll be presenting in May to the council for approval. And again, that's just trying to get those under contract before the expenditure period runs out. Does that make sense? So any questions on that?
Just a quick question. So refresh my memory. So you're no longer considering a roundabout?
Honestly, we very quickly ruled out a roundabout here because of the close proximity to the railroad.
Okay.
Yep. And we'll be bringing this to the Commissioner of Railroads to kind of talk through what our improvements are, but it was just very unlikely that would be a legitimate option, knowing that it was directly adjacent. If we could move it further west, and we did have another option trying to do that, but we quickly ran out of room. We have a stormwater retention pond here. We're running out of right of way, and then there's existing buildings here. So we just couldn't move it far enough away to make that a real option, unfortunately.
And how does this interact with the rest of the South Cheyenne reconstruction project? Does this have to go first, or are they functionally related in that way?
Not really. The rest of the project, so these three elements are kind of directly just adjacent to this intersection. As far as the typical section further north or any of the control north, it's not really attached here. It's far enough away that it doesn't really affect the operations at East Sherrill. So it's really kind of a separate element, and so that's why we're kind of moving ahead just to get that stuff, that money encumbered by the time the expenditure period runs out. But we'll still, it's a little tricky because by moving this stretch ahead, but we're still kind of going to follow back up with typical section on the rest of Cheyenne and the rest of the design process there. This is more just to get some of these construction contracts in the queue, as it were. Any other questions?
This is Troy. What is the total time for construction?
I'm not sure yet. Right now, we're still projecting that we'd be constructing in 2022. So we would basically get these contracts lined up, but not start them until the rest of the design's done, and we're ready to do the full project in 2022. But I'm not sure exactly what the duration is yet. And so I guess I would like to ask, is there desire to see the exact dollar amounts and kind of have it be reviewed by the commission? And if so, then I can move the meeting kind of up in the month.
Will it go through any other commissions besides council? I assume finance and public works, or?
Yep. Exactly.
Okay. As long as it goes through multiple steps, I'm okay with it. But if the transportation committee wants to meet in time to review it, I'm also okay with that. So I think it's up to the committee members.
And when did you say you'd have those figures, Andrew, for a meeting?
When will I have the cost estimates? Is that right?
Yes, the cost estimate.
Yep. Probably in the next two, by the 28th, end of the month, is when we're projecting to have that.
How do the other commission members feel? They'd like to be on in that decision-making process?
Is the primary issue there is the cost of the thing? The design is set, the cost is, we're supposed to weigh in on that? Is that the issue?
Yeah, basically, I would just be presenting kind of three resolutions that would be, with MG&E for undergrounding with the railroad, and potentially with Madison to buy the signal equipment. And so those three would just be three resolutions, of not to exceed amounts for those three elements of this project. And so I want to float it, be new to this role. I don't want to shortchange you guys, but if you're comfortable not, just from a timeline perspective, that it just goes to Board of Public Works, then that works for me.
Well, if that's the business of this commission to review those things, then I would think we should have a look at it before it goes farther. When it's a little more fleshed out in that way. I don't know what I have to say about the cost of these things. And even as to the design, I'm not sure what I have to add, except it does seem important to make that a safe, functional intersection.
And for historical purposes, I know Public Works has addressed some of these other items in the past, so I think we're kind of familiar, and the members that have been on for a while are familiar with some of these, some of these purchase types and design elements.
Yep, exactly. If we met every other week, there wouldn't be a question. It's just a matter of making sure our schedules line up. Some of these things we'll probably just bring to Board of Public Works. Some we'll bring to both. It's just a matter of when we can. So that's why I brought it up.
Well, anyway, I do not have concerns about the way it's outlined so far.
Okay.
I'll
Okay.
say that.
So I'll plan on just leaving the meeting where it is, and then feel free to let me know if you have any comments or questions as that stuff comes up.
Yeah,
Okay, any other questions? I hear someone.
Yeah, if you could, if you said something, for Public Works, maybe you could just CC us at the same time. That way, we can monitor progress that's more Public Works oriented than transportation.
Yep, will do.
Okay, the next items on the agenda are 5A and B, a couple of resolutions. So what I'd like to do for each one of those is, we'll put it on the table so we can have a discussion, get some background from Andrew, and then let anyone that wants to speak on these resolutions do so, and then the commission members can have a further discussion or questions after that point. So the first one is next agenda item is 5A, Resolution R6221, approving revision 1 to state municipal agreement for County Highway MM and McCoy Road. In order to start a discussion, we need a motion to approve.
I move to approve.
I second the motion to approve.
Okay, discussion. I will refer back to Andrew for some background, and then we'll allow anyone who wants to speak on this topic to do so. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. So there's kind of two parts to this. I guess, so WISDOT's requesting this specific SMA be updated by May 1st to not delay the project letting. The revised SMA is needed by WISDOT because the project includes striping a buffered bike lane, which is south of the project limits, specifically related to the HISIP project. So really, it's just kind of a technicality that they want to make sure they have the eligible costs and the ineligible costs kind of specified. WISDOT is maxed out at their current provision, the 7074, 064 and 80 cents. So that number is not changing from them. They just want to make sure that, I guess for them, it's important to have kind of that spelled out. So that's really what this resolution is about, just getting that updated. I will note that going from 60% to 90% when these two different agreements were signed, we do have increased costs, and so I just want everybody to know, this agreement includes kind of an increased cost. It is still, the city's share is still less than what we anticipated in the CIP. So I'll just note that it's higher than what we did anticipate than we had before, but it's still not higher than we've already allocated through the CIP process. So next month we'll have a revised county agreement where you'll see this number come up again. And so, but in this SMA, it's really just about getting WISDOT what they need to get this project let. So hopefully that helps.
Was there anyone who wanted to speak from the public on this resolution? Okay, so maybe it was all for the next resolution. So I think commission members can go ahead and ask Andrew any questions if you like.
I can jump in. Andrew, do you have a number in front of you about how much is budgeted for this in the CIP? Because the project cost, I took a look at the 17520, the resolution from last year, which is the last time this came before council. And the project costs seem to have like more than quadrupled, if I'm looking at it correctly. So I'm glad to hear that we're still below what's budgeted in the CIP, but the jump was surprising to me.
Yeah, that's a good point. So in 2020, we had 350,000, 175,000 was from us, and 175,000 was anticipated from the county. And then in the 2021 CIP, we had about 75,000 specifically from tax levy. So that kind of collectively is that 250. And so when you're seeing, oops, I'll use this one. The 192 in the packet, specifically related to the city's dollar amount. So that's under the 250, and I guess that's where I'm coming from. So yeah, our share of the project has always kind of been down that low level. The actual total project amount is up in that 1.4 million range. And yeah, that has increased quite a bit from the initial estimate, but we pay, WISDOT pays 90% of the eligible construction costs, and then we pay basically a third of the remaining.
So we anticipated this jump, basically, is what we thought this was probably coming. It was just a matter of the project being more laid out over time.
Yep, I think so.
I'm not sure if this is a naive question or silly question or something. Will this go out for bids? Do we really know the cost until it's put out for bids?
Yeah, that's a good question. Exactly. If I had my preference, I would have waited to sign the SMA and the county agreement until after we got the bids back, so we knew exactly the dollar amount. In this case, WISDOT likes to have the SMA beforehand so they can let it. And in their mind, they don't, because they're capped out at that 775 roughly, they don't really care if the cost changes above that. They just want to make sure if the scope changes above that.
It's kind of interesting to see, their primary focus, of all the different actors, you might say. You just have to remember what their perspective is.
Sure, and once I think once that initial application's set up, then they, get their 90% of whatever that is, and then that's their total cap. So after that, it doesn't really matter to them, but if the costs increase, right?
Well, they provide the funds mostly, so
Sure.
they get the biggest say, I guess.
Right. And so, you guys will see this come up again next time through the county, and so that'll actually be more specific to what the actual county share versus ours is, but it'll match this almost entirely. I'm fairly confident.
Do you anticipate that we'll see another jump in project costs? Like, is that something we should anticipate maybe seeing it bump up to that $250,000 budget? Or is this 192 looking like a more solid number? Is there any way to know?
There's not a great way to know, but I will say that our construction costs is what the consultant provided plus 5% because we're going to be constructing it next year. And then we do have an 8% construction contingency in there. So on the construction side of the house, we have some kind of buffer in there. So I think we should be okay, but it's hard to know exactly if we'll find something else out there. And, you know, on the design side, we'll have 100% plans by the end of the month. So the additional engineering you see in there is a change order to get that all done, but that's already included in that full cost.
One more small note, for me, when a resolution from last year is referenced in the resolution, it would be lovely for that to be included in the packet too, just for reference.
Yep, that
So
makes sense.
just for reference, that'd be great. And I don't know if we can add it to the finance and council packets. I don't know if that's possible, but if it is, if we could include resolution R 17520 in the packet, that would be fantastic.
Yep, I'll note that.
Any other questions on the resolution? So we have Resolution R 6221, approving revision 1 to state municipal agreement for County Highway MM and McCoy Road. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? The resolution passes. Next agenda item is 5B, Resolution R 6121, approving a typical section for the Lacie Road Reconstruction Project from Fitchburg Road to Seminole Highway. Again, I'll refer back to Andrew for some background, and then we'll have any speakers that want to speak on this topic go ahead and do that.
I think you need a motion, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for reminding. We
This
have
is-
a motion to approve, so we can have a discussion.
This is Troy. I make the motion to adopt.
I second.
Okay, discussion. I'll go back to Andrew for some background.
Awesome. Okay, so this resolution is approving, a typical section along the whole stretch of roughly a mile of West Lacie Road. The project, we talked a little bit about this on previous commission meetings, extends from just east of Fitchburg Road to the Badger State Trail, and then we can have a separate project that will be constructed concurrently but designed separately to kind of finish off through Seminole Highway. So I'll share my screen just with some of the staff memo, just to walk through that. The original design, and I'll just kind of walk through, roughly what kind of the logic of why we're presenting it now and what the urgency is, I guess. But so there's kind of three elements. We'd like to let in late 2021 or early 2022 to get the best pricing. We also would need to clear any trees from the area before June because of the big brown bat maternity period. And then there's also a potential for the coneflower at a similar time frame. So again, most of that clearing has to be done before that. We want to make sure that we're getting in between mid-June and August to minimize any impacts to school. So that's kind of from a project schedule perspective. And then really we've had one large public meeting on February 17th. We've had 2 follow-up advisory meetings with residents. And it was just kind of a small group of roughly, I think, 8 residents kind of talking about some of the elements, that kind of walking through the corridor and some of the trouble spots. We also responded to 40 questions and then I believe 30 more follow-up questions from that. And we did have quite a few, 20 comments from emails and surveys after that. So a lot of comments. Again, folks are generally concerned about impacts to trees, right-of-way impacts, kind of the redundant bike street or on-street versus shared use path bike facilities, and just generally the project cost. And so that initial concept includes all of these elements, and so I can show you here. So, has a sidewalk on the south side, terrace, buffered bike lanes, a variable median, and this is not the whole stretch of the corridor, but for longer stretches than what our alternative design is showing. And then the terrace on the north side and a 10-foot shared use path. So that's kind of what we're presented on February 17th. And as I noted, this is a wide cross section, though it is somewhat consistent with further sections on East Lacie. But we want to work through kind of what we could cut with folks during the meeting. So through these two kind of advisory group meetings, we talked about some options that maybe weren't necessary. I can show that briefly. So, we kind of X'd out some options that maybe we could try an alternate. And so we got rid of potentially the trees and the sidewalk. I still saved some room for grading. I won't get into that. We got rid of the buffer bike lanes, the medians in many sections, and then kind of redesigned that to see what the impacts would be. And so from that, we did leave the grading for the sidewalk and on the south side for kind of two reasons. One, it provided a little bit of clear zone. If we didn't provide that, then I'll just show you a diagram. It's always easier in a diagram. If we didn't provide that, basically we would just ramp off immediately after the curb, and so that wouldn't, we wouldn't have that clear zone if an errant vehicle went over the curb, that they would potentially have that impact. And a 3-to-1 is not critical slope, but if you did any more than that, it would be. I guess even with a 3-to-1, we'd have to have a kind of level landing down on the side of the hill. Sorry, I should back up. This is a cross-section in the whole, mile plus of the corridor. In this particular cross-section, we have a hill on the north side going up, and then a hill going down on the south side of the road. So I'll show you kind of what I'm talking about graphically of hill on the north side, downslope on the south side. And so, in an option that, so this is that south side that we are grading for a future sidewalk. We're basically allowing kind of level landing. It also allows us to plant trees there. We had 140 or so trees projected to be on the south side of the roadway. So that's kind of the two benefits of why we're saying that. Then in this revised version, we kind of cut down those buffered bike lanes and went down to a 28-foot roadway. Why not just a 22-foot roadway for two 11-foot travel lanes? It's a great question. Again, it comes back to a clear zone. Our local streets are typically minimum width 32 feet. WSDOT recommends anywhere between, I believe it's 32 to 34 for a street like this with curb and gutter. So 28 to 30 seems kind of like on the tighter end. If we did any smaller than that, we really aren't allowing for any flexibility of the space. If there's, for example, an emergency parked vehicle or mail delivery, you can't get around them, right? There's just no space to go around. You're stuck behind them. And in a lot of cases, we know that's going to happen on a daily basis. Somebody's going to have to stop for, to deliver mail or, to pull in somewhere. So it's just building a little bit of that flexibility into the space. And so that's why we kind of built in that 3-foot shoulder, even in the kind of most reduced cross section. And then in the recommended, we have 30 feet just to kind of make better use of that space. We have spot level medians. Again, that's not really in the cross section. That's kind of 3 spots where we're putting in medians for pedestrian refuge islands. We have terraces on both sides. And then we did expand the path on either side of Commerce Park Drive. Again, if we're getting most of the folks off of the street and putting them onto the path, we want to make sure we're allowing enough space between users on the path, going down the hill to give them that good separation so that we don't have a 30-mile-an-hour bicyclist going next to a 5-mile-an-hour kindergartner, that sort of thing. So that just gives a little bit more space. So that's kind of what we worked through, and we evaluated those options in terms of cost, stormwater runoff generated, and high-value trees removed. And so we had this result. So you can see, between the kind of full, large cross-section and this scaled-back one, we have roughly 9% cost reduction. And we did kind of float some other numbers out there, some kind of back-of-the-napkin numbers for medians and buffered bike lanes individually. It doesn't work great, kind of collectively, that's kind of, in the actual design, where it kind of ebbs and flows based upon other constraints. So, we're not seeing all of that. So basically the sum of those three, the sidewalk, the buffered bike lane removal, and the medians don't add up to the 640K, because this is a more realistic number, if that makes sense. And then runoff was about 17%. We did collect high-value trees. Our tree surveyor counted 112 trees along the corridor, but she only marked trees 30 feet from the existing roadway. In some of our highest graded places, and we're seeing up to like 120, for example, feet off of the existing roadway. So we are missing a bunch of trees in kind of a narrow stretch of roadway, and so we are reevaluating those, but at this time we don't know what that impact would be. I will note we are planning something like 270 new trees at 40-foot spacing, so to date we're still looking at a net positive tree impact. And I'll also note that we counted roughly 40 high-value trees, which were hickory, hickory, hackberry, and bur oak. And so, we have 41 of those. And so our city forester said those were kind of the highest value because they're relatively hard to grow and they're relatively rare. And so any of those trees in above fair to poor condition, we count as high value trees that we're particularly trying to save. So I'll note we don't know too much yet, or we know a lot about the rest of the corridor. In that specific quarry area, we don't know what the full tree impacts will be. So I'll note that that's still unknown, although we're getting more answers, and we should have more answers in the next week and a half. So with that, I'll kind of jump down to the staff recommended option. So as mentioned, we basically, we're going through this process. We worked it down to a 20-foot, 8-foot roadway, and that was kind of the minimum we wanted to go to. We didn't see a huge difference to adding 2 more feet to the overall street width. And then you can have on-street bike facilities and actually utilize that space for something. So it would be pretty tight, narrow travel lanes to kind of maintain that 35-mile-an-hour speed limit, but then have some use for that little shoulder area. So that was really the justification for going up 2 more feet, just to make better use of that space. And that's why we included the bike lanes on street in this case, whereas they also have the 10 to 12-foot shared use path along with that. But it's really a justification of we need some flexibility in the roadway space, mainly for the unexpected. And then with that, I mean, that's kind of the overall kind of where we ended up. We did, I think the main point of the advisory group was to really lay out some pros and cons of each of the cross-sectional elements. And so this is where I talked about some of those itemized costs that might add up to more than what the overall cost is. And so, we can take these down, but, these I think provide a good kind of general sense of some of the pros and cons of each of these elements that as we walk through them. So I really like to thank the advisory group for donating their time during the work week. I know it's tough. And I thought it was really helpful to walk through that, and it really helped me kind of wrap my head around kind of what generally we wanted. Looking back, at Fish Hatchery Road, at East Lacie, at McKee Road, Generally, these resolutions for typical cross-sections are pretty vague. We're talking about, establishing one typical cross-section for a whole mile or 2 miles of corridor. So that's what we did here. Note that there's a lot of variation in this street, as you'll see in both the original design here and the alternative design of the 28-foot. Here that, it changes throughout the corridor. We're really trying to define a typical cross-section so we can kind of move forward with logging down some of these nuances of what do we do with the hill, what do we do on the east side with the left turn bay. So I think this is kind of a step in the process. Typically, we would do this when we have 30%, when I couldn't show you all these designs. So at this point, we're a little ahead of the game that we get to kind of look forward. But this is more a check-in of, are we including the right elements in the design that we want to move forward and kind of hone in on some of these more specific things about, how long should this median be, or should we be looking at some other slope elements to reduce some of the grading here, knowing that right now it's going quite a ways up the hill, right? Those sorts of more nuanced discussions we can have in the weeks to come. This is really just trying to get some buy-off on, are we including those right elements before we move forward? So with that, I've said enough. Turn it over to you guys.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Scott, do you have the list of speakers? I think we have Jay and Sue, or is there anyone else who wanted to speak on this topic?
They are the two we have.
Okay, and Jay or Sue, do you have a preference? Who would like to go first?
Sue, I'll leave it up to you if you want to speak, or do you just want me to make some remarks?
Well, Jay, go ahead. And I'm sure you've got most in mind, and I'll listen intently to start.
Well, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to dig into this project, if you pardon the pun. We a group of neighbors have been engaged with this project since we learned of and or attended the February 17th public informational meeting about the first iteration. And as time has gone on, we've been very appreciative for the information that Andrew has been able to provide and been willing to engage with us to look at various alternatives and see if there's not a better way to reduce the cost of this project and reduce its environmental footprint. And certainly progress has been made from our perspective between the first alternative from February 17th and the one in the staff memo dated April 12th. And so we want to thank Andrew and his colleagues for getting us to this point. On the 13th, the neighbors sent an email to the members of this commission identifying issues that we feel needed, and information and analyses that need to be conducted before this commission or the board or the finance committee would render a recommendation to the council. We know that's currently scheduled, the council meeting is scheduled for the 27th, and these meetings have been agended or scheduled for the various other boards and commissions that have some purview in this matter. Our recommendation or request in the email from yesterday is that this commission not act on this tonight, and instead ask for and develop a timeline for getting this information that we can then sit down, roll up our sleeves, and figure out exactly what happens. Now, Andrew made a good point. Typically, there are not multiple cross sections for a 1 mile. This, of course, as we all know, is a different 1 mile than what we typically would see, like fish hatchery between Greenway Cross and one of those streets of this Post Road as an example. That's a different deal than what we're dealing with here. This is a very unique asset to Fitchburg. There are roads like this in other parts of Fitchburg, but this is a unique asset to Fitchburg. And we would like to see it protected to the extent possible. And so that's why we're offering this information and digging at this level of detail. We hope And we believe that something eventually will emerge that everybody can be satisfied with. And I don't want to get into the trenches regarding whether it should be 30 or 20. There's a lot of pros and cons to anything, but I guess the bottom line is we feel this corridor should be protected. And one of the biggest single issues that beyond the bike lanes, the other issue about all the grading on the south side is extremely important because there's a lot of money wrapped up in that, and it's being driven by an ordinance that requires sidewalks on new developments. But in the instance of this development, and as development occurs in this corridor, that may not be an appropriate provision, and given the fact that there's the multi-use path on the north side. But I think we're not going to convince you of anything today other than maybe you should think about whether you want to really refer this to the council. But we're willing to engage in further discussion at the level of detail, and we're very appreciative of the last 2 pages of the last page. It's a big page on the agenda packet that Andrew had up on the screen. It really gets at the level of detail I think that's needed to be able to refine this project to the point where we're convinced that we really can't do any more to minimize the environmental footprint and minimize the loss of trees. And there's some other aspects, maybe there's some other habitat that's involved here. We don't know that yet, but again, thank you for listening to us and reading our email, and be aware of the fact that we want to continue a dialogue to figure out how to deal with this. So with that, I don't know, Sue, do you have any other remarks you'd like to offer?
Really just, first of all, to say, yes, I agree with everything that Jay has said. And that this is a unique section. There's not a lot of room. There's that 3-to-1 drop off on the south side in some sections of Lacie. And it's a situation where when we put everything on the drawing that we want, there really isn't room for all of it, to my view. And that the one thing that isn't required by ordinance is to consider the environment. So we check all the boxes, and it's hardscape infrastructure. And in the meantime, the road that we all like to travel if we're from this area of town, because it's beautiful and there are beautiful things to see there, that'll be gone, and we'll just be able to go through there fast. Well, we won't go through faster. It'll actually, thankfully, be a slower speed limit. But all the hardscape will be there, and everything that we liked about it in the first place is going to be severely compromised. So as a member of the Parks and Recreation Commission, we have an advisory group called the Tree Advisory Committee, and there's just really no process now within city government to look at the environment as closely as I know I would like, and certainly the Tree Advisory Committee is there to advocate many times for raising the level of importance of not just how many trees by number, but mature tree canopy, which provides an entirely different and more comprehensive benefit to the community. It's the cooling shade, it's the habitat for birds, etc. And when we take all of that away, you may have 140 or more small trees, and that's appreciated, but those same creatures will not come back, and they will not build a nest in a tree that's 10 feet tall. That species will want a tree that's 60 feet tall, and they won't come back till one is there. So that's some of the aspects of where I come from and my interest in the process. So thank you for your time.
Chairman Blanchett, can I just make another 30 seconds of remarks? There's one thing that I forgot to mention that listening to Sue reminded me.
Sure, go ahead, Jake.
Thank you. The area from Commerce Park Drive to Rock Ridge is quite unique, and it presents a lot of challenges for designing this project. One thing to keep in mind, and it's covered in the email, but I think it's important for us to remember, the mining permit for Payne and Dolan requires the maintenance of a 200-foot buffer between the existing right-of-way. I don't know what happens if the right-of-way or the road changes, but if that is not going to be disturbed, so to speak, by mining operations. Now, they can probably sell it, but you know the slopes are pretty steep there, and that continues down to the Hammersley property, and the comp plan reflects that area, it's over 1,000 lineal feet of frontage, is designated as parks and conservancy. Now, it's not a park in the sense that it's in private ownership, but it has that designation, and I think that's another reason why we're so sensitive to that and like to see those grading limits and temporary easement lines come a lot closer to the existing right-of-way. I realize it can't get on top of it, but this is an ingredient I think that should be taken into account as we go through the process at another level of detail. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both for your input, and thanks for the email, Jay. I think that as far as now, the commission members, you have questions for Andrew regarding the Lacie Road typical section?
I have a clarification question. I'm looking at several pages describing the advisory group meetings that I pulled off of Jay of your email. At least I went to a link and found this number of pages, and it shows an alternative. I think your preferred alternative without having the bike paths and nothing, and not a pedestrian path on the south side and the two lanes together. And there's a page here where it talks about alternative comparison. And shows original design, new alternative, and the difference with respect to cost and runoff. But Andrew, in your presentation, I thought this was a comparison between your original design and the one that you've now come up with, which is not the same as Jay's preferred one. So, do you know the table I'm talking about, this alternative comparison table? I just want to know what's being compared here. Yep. Are you comparing your original design with your revised design based on input, or are you comparing the original design versus Jay's preferred design?
Thank you, Rich, or Bill, sorry. That's a great question. Sorry for the miscommunication. So it's kind of a curveball here at the end. So I guess what the table compares is the original alternative presented to the public on February 17th, which is kind of that bigger cross-section that included a sidewalk, included buffered bike lanes. The April 7th alternative is what was presented to the advisory group, and that is 28 feet of roadway width, and so that's where you're seeing that 9% reduction. What the staff recommendation is, which I don't have the specific numbers for, but it's going to be about 6 million, would be a 30-foot cross-section. So we just add 2 more feet to that April 7th alternative just to be able to get in bike lanes versus a 3-foot shoulder. So the alternative comparison was kind of before the big cross-section versus the smallest cross-section, and this is kind of a Goldilocks in between.
So this alternative is not the one that Jay is recommending. It is the one you derived following conversations with that advisory group.
Exactly. Yep.
So we don't know the cost and the runoff under Jay's plan, and I think Jay's saying, well, why don't you wait and get those numbers?
Yeah, we can definitely calculate those. I think, again, it's going to be closer to the April 7th, but somewhere in between the two. So, if that's the big hang-up, we can definitely provide those to you. But I would say that, we're talking about 2 feet of pavement, just to clarify.
Andrew, this is Troy. The section of Finch Hatchery that's being reconstructed now is also going to reconstruct the retaining walls. Have retaining walls been considered with this project to reduce the footprint and to maintain the original landscape profile as much as possible?
That was early on. That we definitely, the design team before I even got here, checked that out. It was pretty quickly dismissed just from a cost perspective, but knowing that, you know, we could potentially have some high-value trees that we could save, knowing that we're going quite a bit up there, that's definitely still a consideration that we would make. It would just be, we would have to get that cost estimate to actually understand. That right now doesn't include that, but it does include the grading, you know, the 200 or some feet up the hill. So yeah, it's still definitely an option and not necessarily contingent upon what is decided on the cross-sectional elements, right?
Right, yeah, it's just reduce the encroachment on the existing profile of the landscape is why I bring it up.
Yep, for sure. And we would,
Andrew, can you pull?
I'm sorry.
Can you pull up the preferred section on the screen one more time, please?
Yep. And so this is the staff recommended section. I'll note that, you know, if you didn't have these 5-foot bike lanes, you would have 11-foot travel lanes and 3-foot shoulders. So it's very similar to this, just with 2 more feet in this case versus the kind of narrowest alternative.
Just real quick, I sat in with the group, and also in previous discussions with Board of Public Works, and one of the things, the design elements on this one was on the south side looks great. The bike lanes on the street were going to kind of be a sticking point. I won't speak for everyone on the Board of Public Works, but you know, the recommendation based on discussions that came out of Public Works were, you know, minimize the footprint by, you know, looking at removing the bike lanes that were on street and really take full advantage, whether it be a 10-foot or a 12-foot path on the north side.
Yep. And honestly, that's where we were at with the 28-foot wide road. It just seemed like, you know, if you can add 2 more feet and get on-street bike facilities and make use of that space, you know, and allow for different user groups to, you know, stay on West Lacie when they've been on-street bike facilities for 3 miles, that seemed like a big enough win to justify going to 2 feet to use that space for more than just shoulder. But it was really just, yeah, it was that we needed at least some shoulder just for clear zone and some space flexibility. You know, 28 feet's the minimum we could fit 3 trucks through, you know, side by side. So, and then we just thought we might as well bump it up to 30 to actually get some on-street bike facilities. So that's kind of the justification for that. So hopefully that makes sense.
Hi, this is Rich. I got a few comments. First of all, I've driven that road many, many years. I used to ride my bike on it before Military Ridge was even anywhere near here. But I have a few questions. First of all, you have a 24-inch curb and gutter. I'm assuming that's 6 inches of curb and 18 inches of gutter. Is that correct?
Right now, our current design standards are 24 pan, 24 curb head, and that's mainly for maintenance. It's kind of like our median curb and gutter that we're applying on the outside.
The reason I'm asking is because of the 5-foot bike lane goes up to the face of the curb, right? So how much of that, subtract how much from the 5 foot for is the actual gutter?
4 feet of pavement, yep.
Okay. Does that jive with the current bike ped plan? Has that been or is this all following the current bike ped plans?
Right, so, you know, I think we noted on this last time that, just briefly, that, you know, according to the 2017 bike ped plan, that the recommended facility type would be, you know, either buffered bike lanes, a shared use path, or if volume got high enough, both. And so in this case, we're kind of saying, okay, the shared use path is really the main facility here. We're just offering kind of on-street facilities for the folks that still want to maintain.
No, it's good. I like that. But back to, well, Jay had mentioned something about the sidewalk on the south side. The shared use path is on the north side, correct?
Right. Yep.
Okay, so there is no shared or sidewalk on the south side, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right now, we'd just be grading for it, but not installing it.
And then the project scope, there's something about the trees in there, but that doesn't seem like it's fully worked out, fully baked. What's up with that? I don't want to go forward if we're not following the scope of the plan. If we don't have the information, I know you say we're at a critical point in the schedule, but I think if it gets to us when it's at a critical point in the schedule, then it's getting to us too late.
Sure. Yep.
How are we going to deal with the tree thing?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So I think the next steps would be, from my understanding, it's, cross-section, and the transportation project plat, which would actually kind of lay out what we're actually buying. And then, council and you guys would still have an opportunity before we would actually go to construction to get that approval. So we kind of have 3 more check-in points. So I think some of those, maybe not cross-sectional element related things, but, other, spot level, like for example, near the quarry, could definitely be addressed at the TPP discussion and kind of through the advisory group over the next month or so, month and a half.
Okay.
So I think we're still okay to kind of figure some of those details out that are specific, maybe 200, 300 feet up along the whole corridor. Or sorry, it's more like 500 feet along the whole corridor.
Yeah, I hope you understand what I'm getting at, is if it's not baked, I don't want to put it on the table yet.
Right. Typically, we wouldn't have, like I said, we wouldn't have this design. Like typically, I would have been back here in October talking about this before we had any of this design ready to go.
So if we don't do this now, what happens then? Does it go a year later?
I guess any month that we delay, we move 1 more month into, right now we have a little bit of buffer to get that let in a time where we can get good prices. If we go, if we go 1 more month, we're in November, December, January, and then after we get out of that, we're really not going to get good prices. So.
Okay, thanks. Just personal, I always think that it's not worth saving money if we're not going to do a good job.
I agree.
So if I don't, that just kind of it goes away. I don't want to see us doing a mediocre job to save a few bucks, but that's just my opinion.
And if I can jump in, a question on the timing issue, Andrew. It looks like from your memo that it has to do with getting trees cut down before the big brown bats have their maternity period, which and they're not going to have much of a maternity period if those trees are cut down before that. I know that. I mean, I'm not sure I quite understand that. I guess what I'm really asking is to speak to or clarify a little bit about the urgency here and the consequences of waiting. Why couldn't trees be cut down next spring before a mid-June construction period?
Yep, they could. Yeah, it's just kind of all collective that we'd like to get it let, in a time where we can get good pricing on it and make sure that we have enough time to get some of those, get the tree impacts taken care of before June. So I guess I would just say, right now we're looking maybe 5 months from when we have approval for the TPP, which would be May. If we can keep the most compressed schedule and we can still get, enough time to get the right of way. So I guess we just say that they kind of go together in that we want to make sure we're getting a letting for this project if we do it next year by January. And so we really have like maybe 2 or 3 months to get this kind of understood. And so that's why right now we're at a critical point to say, okay, the actual typical section elements are okay. Now let's sink our teeth into some of these spot level issues, if that makes sense. So we're kind of moving past, what's just included generally in the project. But yeah, and I think, not knowing a whole lot about the big brown bat maternity, that I believe that they, skip between trees and that, that we don't want to be in the way while they're doing that, if that makes sense.
And I got a few other questions. One of them, I'm just a little confused. We got a memo from Jay, with the co-authors, whom I assume are all members of the advisory group. Is that right? There's a larger membership of the advisory group, which I don't know who was on that. And also, we haven't seen, you made a reference to getting comments, and I haven't seen other comments that have come in. So I don't have a good sense of anybody's opinion except Jay's, which is loud and clear.
We keep on referring to me, but actually it's a group of 6 people who have reviewed all these drafts, and we've talked at length about I'm an engineer and I work for DNR and I put a lot of this together, but this is a collective, and by the way, there's 70 people who've signed a petition already who want the reductions that we've identified that we think are appropriate. We also understand they may not all happen, but this is far beyond just me and my love for this particular stretch of road and hoping that it can be preserved to the extent possible. And so I'm sorry for the interrupt, but I just don't want I don't want all this attributed to me because it's far broader than just me.
My question was, though, I mean, I see the 6 names. I know who the 6 people are that you mentioned. And I of course, there are 70 other people, but have there been any other comments in the course of this? I mean, I hear secondhand of neighbors that are saying, well, I can't wait till that bike path is completed on that section of road because people are afraid to ride their bikes over that hill the way it is. So I know, and I'm guessing that there are probably a lot of people in Fitchburg's very significant bike community that would probably be very favorable to this, but I don't know that. But I would just be guessing that they'd be happy to see a nice, comfortable bike path going over the hill to Fitchrona Road. So,
Bill, if you're asking me the question, who was on the advisory group, it was myself and Joe Arito, who's one of the 6 signatories to the letter. The other 4 people were not on the advisory group, but they were briefed on it. And the advisory group consisted of a number of other people, including a rep from Payne and Dolan, and Andrew, you know the names of the people, but the advisory group was a different group than the people who sent the letter.
but okay. So it means
There are minutes for the advisory group meetings on the project website, the Lacie Road project website. I'll send it out to the TTC committee by email right now, but it's the Lacie Road Fitchrona to Seminole Highway project page on the Fitchburg website. And I just sent it out to the TTC.
And Bill, to help further kind of answer that question, I live out in Quarry Vista, which is, the neighborhood that is directly impacted by this. Let neighbors know a handful of times, 2-3 times at most, or 2-3 times that this was going on. If they had any comments, questions, concerns, please either address Andrew or address myself. And did not get any direct feedback from any of the neighbors out here in Quarry Vista, which was why I was anxious to be on the advisory committee to kind of see what was going to be happening with the design of the typical section here.
Andrew, could you explain why take off that sidewalk on the south side if there's no pedestrian path besides cost savings?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so I guess there's also kind of a question of maintenance, especially if there's not adjacent development there. If we build a sidewalk and nobody's there to maintain it, then that would put it on city staff to go out there and plow that as well. So I think that was a big question of just kind of if nobody's going to use it for the short term, maybe we can wait until there's development there for it to be built. But we still want to grade it, or at least that terrace, to get the trees in there and get a little bit of kind of recoverable slope and kind of grade it for future development so that it's kind of planned in there already, if that makes sense.
So it wouldn't preclude a sidewalk going in there in a future time?
Yeah, for sure. And it actually would accommodate that, you know, for any new development that would be on the corridor.
And I got one question about your alternative. It also says removes that bike buffer. If there's no median anymore, how does that jive with the safety of the bikers if there's no painted buffer?
Yeah, it is definitely tight. I'll say if we didn't have the shared use path, I wouldn't feel comfortable putting a traditional bike lane with no buffers adjacent to a 35-mile-an-hour travel lane. In this case, it's just that we can make better use. I mean, if the council doesn't feel comfortable going, or commission going with bike lanes, we could do 5-foot shoulders, but that'd still give on-street bike cyclists a place to bike without having to kind of get on the path and get off. So it just makes better use of that space. But yeah, you're right, that typically without an alternative option, like the shared use path as a higher comfort facility, we would definitely be putting buffers adjacent to a 35-mile-an-hour roadway.
So I'm confused, and pardon me for this, but I missed that point. In the current cross-section that we're voting to move forward or to recommend consideration by the council, there are not buffers?
That's correct. Yep. Yeah, they're 10-foot travel lanes with 5-foot bike lanes.
So there are narrow travel lanes and no buffers, so the bike is 3 feet closer to the car.
Yep.
And I think speaking for myself, that was one of the major objections that I had with the on-street bike lane to begin with, and just adding the additional 2 feet to get that bike lane on there. It was my impression that having the bike lanes on street were not going to be, a major attraction of this corridor. The multi-use path on the north side was going to be able to be more than accommodating for bikers that are on that path.
Has I don't know, we have some kind of bike groups in Fitchburg, bike aficionados, and a lot of enthusiasts that way. Do we know, have we gotten an opinion from the bike community on that question?
Angie was able, and she's on the Fitchburg Bike Committee. She was part of the advisory group. She said of I don't want to quote her directly, but she said of the original alternative that she liked that. She didn't see any problems with it, and that she was comfortable going to just a shared use path as well. So I think either way, it seems like she's comfortable. We haven't heard from any other of the bike committee or bike groups specifically about this directly. So I can't speak for other groups if they would prefer other alternatives, but I think this is kind of a compromise between a bigger on-street facility, but still makes use of a very necessary flexible space between the curb faces.
Andrew, Troy, if that was the bike on surface bike lanes were removed, that'd make for a 20-foot road? Or would that not be would that be a no-go with other funders, and
Right.
it'd have to be expanded anyway to a minimum of 30? Or what is the absolute minimum that everybody else will accept?
So there's not a whole lot of specific guidance that would say we have to do this, but I can offer that our local streets are 32 feet minimum typically, and that does have on-street parking on it, so there's kind of some flex space in that. WISDOT for reconstruction projects with urban low-speed facilities, curb and gutter, and the like, would recommend that we have 32 to 34 feet. Again, it's a little bit of a travel lane and clear space, and so that's not without bike facility, or that's without bike facilities. So they would just have that just be extra width. And I guess the real justification there is, you know, if you have a 20-foot curb to curb, you just, and there's any problem, you know, there's any stoppage, then now nobody can get through, right? And so it's just a little bit of flexibility there. And from errant vehicles, you know, if you have, you know, typical vehicles are, you know, 7 feet wide, if you know, you want to have some margin for error there. So that's kind of where we came up with the minimum would be a 28-foot, and we didn't see we saw a benefit in adding 2 extra feet to have on-street bike facilities. So that's what we moved forward. Does that make sense? So,
Well, I've observed that a lot of bike lanes in the winter function as a place to put snow.
right.
And just out of necessity, as for the first few days after a snowstorm, the bike lanes tend to be occupied with snow piles.
And I'll note, though I would not advocate for this, but this is that flexible portion of the roadway where, you know, mail delivery or other kind of stop vehicles could you know, temporarily stop. And so that's kind of what we're building in with these shoulders, right? If we had 20-foot roads, you really couldn't stop on the roadway without blocking traffic, right? And currently on East Lacie, you know, with buffered bike lanes, that's kind of how it functions, that the mail delivery stops in the bike lane and people are still able to get by. So that's kind of the intention of making use of the space, but also allowing some flexibility, if that makes sense.
What about the on or you know, driveway access? Is there anything that could be used to prohibit that, or can someone build a property dwelling or something that has a driveway at any point in the project, or would that be prescribed by any practical or technical reasons?
I think our ordinance has some provisions of that the city engineer can restrict access depending upon site distance. So certainly on the hill sections, there could be that, but is that what you mean, of where driveways would be located? There's some provision of that.
You know, there's some roads in the city.
I think
Some roads in the city, by necessity, there are limits on new driveway access, PD. Except for a few grandfathered dwellings, there's no access to that road. You know, and I can see why. So I'm trying to think of a way to, you know, make sure that design considerations are not needing to be undone for safety reasons or otherwise. I mean, just theoretically, someone could build a garage with access at the, you know, a point in the curve from the south side. Just, you know, you have a basement and the top floor is the garage, or, you know, I'm just speculating, but it's, to me, there's a tricky point of safety here for the long term based on what type of driveway access will be allowed in that stretch from Commerce Park to the current development there.
Yep.
So I think that's worthy of consideration.
Yeah, definitely.
At some point when the city adopts the formal contract and definition of the roadway is, what do we do about driveway access in the future?
Yep. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and we're, you know, aligning driveways with our current plan for the quarry access. So we're just trying to clean some of that up. But yeah, certainly I think, depending on where it's at, I think our ordinance would apply for where those driveways could be, or what control they could have, whether that's just right in, right out versus full movement.
Yeah, because that would definitely change how you would view certain parts of the roadway
Yep.
for design considerations. So, but I think they have to be addressed now just because of the unique curvature and slope of the area is. You know, it's better to do that now than to have to put in expensive retaining walls or something on the city right-of-way part.
Yep.
You know, we're just speculating about what might happen in the future, but I think we have to consider it.
Thank you. Yep, makes sense.
Andrew, I had looked at some of the project materials and I saw that TIA funding was mentioned, TEA. And I think it mentioned, does, if you have TIA funding in this project, do you have to do bike lanes and a bike and a multi-use path as well? Is that, do you know if that's one of the requirements of that?
No, not that I know of. We checked in with WSDOT, and initially we thought that if we differed from our original application, we'd have to go back and talk to them. That's not the case, so we can clarify that point. So, yeah, so basically, you know, I think the T grant is really contingent upon the job growth. We still, you know, want to maintain, you know, standards and, you know, all the things that we're doing in terms of engineering specs, but it's not contingent upon what we build, that T grant. But yeah, thanks for that clarification.
So I want to go back to the trees for a second. I'm happy to hear that we're going to go back and take a look at that additional wider area that might be affected by the road construction, to take a look about important trees. I'm curious about, so I guess I'm trying to understand like the flow of the process in terms of where we still have flexibility if we move forward with this right now. So there will still be decision points in the future about how do we accommodate and save individual trees, even if we approved this cross section today. Is that like you'll be working with the forester and with the design plan for the specific outline of the exact road, with that in mind? Or I'm curious about how you make those decisions, because we don't have a tree protection ordinance. The tree advisory committee is working on that right now. So I guess I don't know like how the decision process works for you designing a road without that type of specific guidance.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So yes, through the TPP, the Transportation Project Plat, where we actually will have a full design and the kind of full right-of-way takes and you know, easements that we'll need. You know, that'll be a resolution to approve that. That'll really be where we have to boil everything down of exactly where we're taking trees and property and easements. So I guess that's really where some of those kind of micro scale, you know, 500 feet of the whole corridor decisions can take place, and specifically kind of how we treat those. You know, for example, we learned that, you know, potentially we'd be relocating a driveway, so we thought, you know, the development kind of in the southwest portion of the corridor, that driveway is going to link up with the quarry. Now that might be moving further west to link up with the existing Rock Ridge. Am I saying that right? And so potentially that would mean, you know, removing the medians there at the quarry, so that would reduce width, right? So those sorts of like kind of minutiae, you know, smaller scale, exactly where the trees are. Yeah, we'll definitely have another check-in, and we can get through like exactly what the details would be on that.
So we could like lower the length of a median to save a particular tree if we're like, we can get down to the nitty-gritty of those specific details.
Yep.
Okay. And then will you be working with the forester to make those decisions, or like how does that decision process happen? Is it, how does the flow go? Do you bring the city forester in at some point when the TPP is more laid out?
I think right now the plan was just kind of keep moving forward with what she defined as the high value trees and try to save as many as we can. For example, unfortunately, moving that driveway access, the 8 high value trees we could save might be directly south of that road. So, you know, I think we're going to be working through which trees we can save that she kind of find as high value. But certainly we'll bring Anna in to talk about, you know, if there's also kind of a uncertainty about, you know, whether it's 5 to 10 feet away from the grading limits, even some of those trees might not survive depending upon the root damage. So yeah, we'll be talking about what those specifics are and whether or not we can save some of these. Or for example, on the eastern side, we have some existing pockets of trees and how we can kind of thread the needle potentially to save some of those. I think that's really the question of how can we save some of the existing trees with our cross-sectional elements in kind of a creative way. So I think that's kind of going to be what we work on over the next month after we get approval of or whatever month we get approval on the month later, we're gonna be kind of tying down some of those specifics based upon the cross-sectional allowance that we have. Does that help?
So the 5-foot grading, when you're talking about that 5-foot grade on the south side, does that process of grading it imply cutting down all of the trees? Or do you grade it and you could maintain trees in that section?
I can kind of share my screen. So this is, yeah, that primary. So I'll also note that, I should have probably explained this earlier, but you kind of see this orange line is that original grading limits, and the green dash line is the 28-foot cross-section, or 28-foot street grading limits. So we'd be somewhere in between that, about 2 feet off of that green line with our current, proposed design. And so you can kind of see that what we're talking about at specifically Station 120, which is adjacent to the quarry, that, by regrading that kind of that 4% cross slope or for the terrace and 2% for the sidewalk, you're kind of extending out that, that land, and then we'll have to grade back at 3-to-1 to existing limits, if that makes sense. So, I would still recommend, even if we didn't have this, we would still want to grade this starting here at 4-to-1 to have recoverable slope is what it's called. That basically we need some level outside of the travel lane. 16 feet is generally, for a rural cross section at this volume and speed, that we would want to kind of have a clear zone of if a vehicle goes off, we don't want it tipping over. And so and that's kind of what I was saying earlier, of that even if we didn't have this, we would still be regrading this slope to a 4-to-1. So we would reduce, proportionally to what this 7 + 5, 12 feet is. So this would lower, but we'd still be regrading the south side just based upon reconstruction of the roadway.
Okay, so we can't get away from affecting that.
Yep, and anything in that grading limits is effectively going to die, as
And that's the
well
difference
as,
between like a rural road versus a more urban road, which is what we're basically turning this from a rural road into an urban type
Yep.
road. Is that?
Yep,
And that's the difference.
and we had talked a little bit about potentially what a rural cross-section would look like, and this shows what that would look like. Again, this is with the alternative that we talked about with the advisory group, so it's a little bit narrower than where our final preferred alternative is. But because we're going to be generating runoff, we would have to construct a ditch to, in the absence of curb and gutter in a rural cross-section, we'd have to construct a ditch to convey that water, so that's not just dumping into private property. So, we would have to construct something there, in this case, swales, and so that would, increase that fill section south of the roadway. So in either case, a rural or urban cross-section, we'd be doing some grading on the south side, and anything in that grading limits plus 5 to 10 feet is probably going to die.
Okay.
I have a question, Andrew. When the city evaluates trees, does it take into account that certain trees need to breathe, literally? Their roots have to be no further than so many inches from the surface, or they suffocate. So is this part of the high-value tree evaluation process that the city uses?
It wasn't, in that case, we were just saying, if it's in the grading limits plus 5 feet, it's gonna die. So it doesn't matter if we do any grading or anything. So that kind of solves that of just like assuming it's gonna get cleared and die. But yeah, there's definitely some, we'll be working with the city forester about what new trees should be planted there from like a salt runoff and what is tolerant of that, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, kinda.
Okay.
It looks like the grade will kill trees.
Yep.
Even if you did nothing, so you need to remove the trees before they die, and time to do that is during the construction
Exactly.
process, when you can do everything effectively and not one at a time at pretty big cost.
Yep.
Is that
That's right. Yep.
make sense?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We would grub the trees beforehand and then regrade everything. Yep.
Okay. I have another question. Is there any, if you do sidewalks on both sides, effectively, one a path, one a sidewalk, I didn't see any pedestrian crossing markings on your, so is there any provision for pedestrian crossings if there is a sidewalk on the south side?
Yeah, there are a few, so I can kind of share my screen. So like the most likely places where there would be development on either side would be probably on the western side. So in this case, these two pedestrian refuge islands would provide, and like I said, that there could be a driveway that comes in here, so we're going to start to plan for that. But under the current assumptions, this would be kind of a connection to this southern neighborhood. So we don't have pavement markings illustrated on these, but there would be an intention to add those crosswalks adjacent or in that path of the pedestrian refuge island. Similarly, at the quarry access, if that is, so you see the crosswalks there. So
Oh, okay.
in some cases we have them marked, and some we don't. So we're not quite at that stage, but yeah, we would. Any place we would have an opportunity to mark, consistent with our guidelines, we would do that.
Okay.
Sometimes I forget.
I had a couple comments. I know this road is, as Gabriella said, is changing from a country road to an urban road, more urban road. It's in the urban service area. Because of that and because of the growth in Fitchburg, I'm just thinking that to go back, I worked on the 2017 Bike and Pedestrian Plan. I was on the working group and that committee. And I look back today, and that road is one of the primary bike routes in Fitchburg, has been designated for a while. And it's highly recommended on primary designated bike routes to have both a multi-use path on one side and buffered protected bike lanes on the road itself. I hate losing mature trees. I love biking on roads with mature trees. I wish that any of them didn't have to come down. I feel like it's kind of inevitable. This road, though, is going from rural to an urban road. There's going to be a lot of growth along it. When you have multi-use paths with runners, walkers, casual cyclists, families, little kids on their bikes, and you've got a fast recreational commuter cyclist on that same trail, especially if there's any hills at all, it creates a dangerous situation, and you will see the more experienced bicyclists biking on the bike lanes for that reason on the road itself. And if you don't have that separation, you're opening up the opportunity for more accidents on that multi-use path if you don't put those in. And I know that it's going to be difficult to get protected buffered bike lanes on that road later on when traffic is picking up on the trail and more and more people are using that road. So it's looking, we're looking into the future here. And I just think that for a best practice that, that would really be the way to go. So I'm actually concerned that the buffered part of the bike lane has been removed from the plan. So I would, I would like it to see that come back actually. As I said, I hate, I've driven the road, I biked the road, and has a great rural character, but I'm afraid that's going to go away anyway with all the development along it as the city grows. So just looking from that perspective, that's what I would like to see.
I'd like to piggyback on that. I don't think you could have said it better, Darren. As a parent who that multi-use path is really for dog walkers, joggers, and your little kids on tricycles and little bikes. It's not for your bike. It's dangerous when you have a biker going 30 miles an hour and a child on a bike who doesn't know how to bike yet. What ends up happening is either the experienced bikers go on the road, where there is no lane, or the families stay off the multi-use path. So I too would suggest that you put that buffer back in, looking to the future, because Lacie Road is one of the only roads that goes east to west across all of Fitchburg. It's gonna be an overflow when McKee Road gets, when there's construction on McKee, or if there's too much traffic on McKee. So I think we need to build Lacie Road as best as we can now.
And I'll, just to throw in my 2 cents, I agree with those, Jason and Darren, and so I would not support approving the alternative cross-section that we have in front of us. I think the original one, for the reasons they've given, is better. I have no objection to delaying this process, as Jay's memo, I think, is asking for, to get more information. I'm not so concerned about the timing of it, but I do think that we should build adequate accommodations in the roadway for bicycles with buffers. And I would just add that some of the bicycles, an increasing number of bicycles that will use it will be e-bikes, electronic bikes. And those are, of course, can be accommodated on a multi-use path, but they can be even more dangerous than a biker, because some of those can go pretty fast, and they're heavier. So I think, for purposes of today's action, approving the alternative cross-section that we're looking at, I would vote no.
So, Andrew, let me ask you this: so for buffered, because I guess what's striking me now in a way that it hadn't before was that just how many trees we're going to lose. Like, if we do this road at all, we're going to lose a lot of trees. Which I guess it didn't hit me until right now with this discussion with the grading and learning more about how these roads are built. And so it does strike me that we're going to lose a lot of trees no matter what. But if we do this alternative cross section, we're also creating something that's dangerous and obviously is not supported by several of the committee members. How much does it add to add buffered bike lanes? How much, because this is a 28-foot. What would buffered bike lane, would we going back to the original cross section, or is it somewhere in between the two?
Yeah, it would be very similar to the original cross-section without the sidewalk. So we're looking at maybe $150,000 savings, just not putting the sidewalk, but grading it. And then, the medians are kind of spot in either case. So yeah, I would say it's much closer to kind of the original proposed February 17th with the buffers.
And I guess I'll just say too that, I respect the bike plan. The bike committee came to committee of the whole and gave a presentation about biking in Fitchburg, and it's wonderful. I'm not a biker myself, so it was really interesting to hear that. And I respect that perspective and think that safety is important. But I will also say that from my personal perspective, preserving the environmental characteristics is important to me. And we don't have a tree protection ordinance or anything that has that be part of the process early on, like the bike plan. Which is something that we're working to remedy in the tree advisory committee. But yeah, it's just those competing interests, and I wish we had a tree protection ordinance already so that this could be guiding this process from earlier on, even before, long before this even, but that's just a consequence of not having something in place.
Can I just offer something real fast? And sorry if I'm repeating myself. We touched on this briefly last time. So this is in the 2017 bike ped plan, and for 35 to 45 or 40 mile an hour roadways in kind of this 2-lane, so we will not be expecting over 10,000 vehicles per day for the foreseeable future, 20 to 30 years. So we'll probably fit more into this bucket, and that's kind of the buffered bike lane or the parking protected or slash shared use path. And so this would be on-street facilities, whereas this would be an and. So this would be buffered bike lanes plus a shared use path or parking protected bike lane. So I'm sorry, not parking, but protected bike lane. So really, according to our standards, once we get over that 10,000 vehicles per day, once you have enough conflicts that it becomes uncomfortable, then it would recommend having both. So we're kind of somewhere between these two, and I think that's kind of where we were trying to find this compromise of, okay, maybe we just do traditional bike lanes on the roadway to still have an on-street facility, but then also should provide the slightly, larger than our typical 10-foot, 12-foot along the hill shared use path. So that's kind of where the compromise was. Again, it's between tree preservation and kind of providing facilities for all users, both folks that, want to, use on-street facilities and go faster, and folks that don't. So that's where we came up with as a balance, but I will note it is not a perfect balance.
Can I ask a couple more clarifying things? So a couple more things that are part of this project that I guess are not encapsulated by this resolution would be decisions about lighting would be down the road, is that correct? Decisions about landscaping within those in-between spaces, in between the multi-use path and the street. That type of landscaping is still up for discussion.
So I would say for both of those, certainly up for discussion in terms of open to talk to the public. Though I don't think we typically bring those decisions here, but I would certainly could if you guys are interested in weighing in on that.
I guess I'll just say that because I'm trying to advocate more for natives versus putting in grass that
Yep.
needs to be mowed constantly.
Yep. And that definitely came up in our advisory group meeting. It's certainly an option that certainly on the south side of it, it makes a lot of sense.
And then in terms of the multi-use path, is there any consideration of pervious surfaces versus, just putting straight down asphalt? Or I don't know what the cost difference in that would be, but just because this is a really complicated stormwater area as well, which is something we haven't touched on. We've had the sub-zero kill study. This is a complicated area that potentially needs pumping stations, very expensive stormwater project. So creating an additional impervious surface is a concern. And if we do decide to widen the cross-section again, if that's the will of the council, ultimately, that does create some stormwater considerations.
We didn't look yet at impervious surface for the shared use path. That could be an option. I don't think we have a lot of precedent for that, but I think this would definitely be a good a place where that would be needed, as you noted. We do have two, stormwater detention ponds specifically planned for this additional runoff that would, and one of them is in that North Stoner Prairie neighborhood plan area, so that would be 100% infiltration. So, and that's what stormwater facilities we have planned for that. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I think Gabrielle has a great idea with the pervious pavement. We have pervious pavement just down here at the library for that angled parking, and that's been for a long, long time. So I think that's a great idea. I also agree with everybody else. Just like I said earlier, I don't want to save money to do a mediocre job. I think the buffered bicycles is what we need. Bicycle lanes, I meant.
If that's the case, couldn't we make a motion to accept the resolution with an amendment to add buffered bike lanes?
Are you asking me? Sorry. I'm not sure. That sounds fine to me. I don't know exactly how these typically work.
I think we'd need to see a cross-section before we did that. I mean, we all are in agreement pretty much, but I don't know how we would pass something that we haven't seen.
Sure. So it would look.
Just a suggestion, we could, if we could move to go back to the original cross-section, deleting the south sidewalk. I think that amounts to the same thing. But I also do want to respect the Jay's group and the thought they put into their concerns, and I have no, and I guess I would, if we we're going to do that, I would suggest postponing further action until we get a chance to consider for the engineers to respond to their concerns and get us some data about how this will affect trees and how this will affect runoff.
Andrew, how much flexibility do
Can I
you
offer a
have?
remark about information that's missing for a decision today? Can I be recognized, or is that out of order?
No, sure, go ahead, Jay.
Okay. I think we all need to be aware of the fact that we haven't seen the definition of what high-value tree is. If you look at that list, you don't see white or red oak there. The survey, I believe, showed at least 80 or 90 trees 6 inches or greater in diameter. Not necessarily the 3 species that are identified, but there are literally hundreds and hundreds of trees that are in it probably fair to good condition in the corridor that's within these outer bounds of the grading zone. And they're all going to be lost by this project as currently recommended to this committee. You don't know how many of those, you don't know where those trees are or how many there are or what their age is or what their diameter. You don't know anything about those trees. The only thing you know is that 30 feet on either side of the existing road, they found 140 trees, of which 80 to 90 were in fair to good condition. And they weren't box elder or other junk stuff. They were probably mainly hardwoods. And so one of the things that is not on the table right now, and it's one of the things that we've suggested should be defined, is exactly what the true tree inventory is in the footprint of this proposal or alternative proposals. Thank you.
Andrew, what would be the effect if we tabled action on this until the next meeting? On the effect on what you're working on?
So, I mean, it would just delay kind of like, you know, the sketch. I mean, we would still have plenty to talk to the advisory group about, but it certainly, you know, it would delay kind of next steps and then subsequently when we can let. So
Yeah,
I think we have a little bit of wiggle room, but we know that there's always going to be something that comes up later.
I bring it up because it looks like people want to get a better feeling. I mean, well, I brought up the retaining walls.
Mm-hmm.
There's the buffered bike lanes, and there's the sidewalk or not on the south side. And I think we're looking at too many choices at this point without any, I don't know, meat, you know, nothing. So I think we're kind of trying to guess, and I think we'd make a better decision, and the council would too, and Public Works, if we had a better sense as to, you know, the specific options or the options with more specificity in them rather than just generalizations, because I think there's a reluctance to make a commitment to a specific scenario or set alternative without, you know, knowing that we may foreclose an option that, oh, that would have been nice maybe in 6 months, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. So that's the feeling I have, is
Sure.
where we can't quite commit as a group to something that we can't quite grasp.
Yep. I just want to urge, you know, this is the first time I've been through this process, but typically we don't have this level of detail. So maybe that's what's bogging us down, that it's almost like too much information that we...
Well, this is a unique road. I mean, the only thing that's close to it is, I like it when I go past the bicycle repair station there on Seminole Highway and I make that left, you know, I'm in the country. It's a nice feeling. It lasts for about 10 seconds, but it's there. And that's the feeling that I sense that the homeowners are also expressing. So it's kind of a valuable thing. I treasure that ride every time I go on Seminole Highway just for that going south feeling that I have. I think it's pretty nice for me. So there's some aesthetics here that I think have been brought up that are unique to this road, just like the Seminole Highway section I mentioned that are very important. So I think the aesthetics here need more attention to get more buy-in from everybody.
Okay. Yeah, I think, again, just kind of 2 points. That definitely makes sense. And that's not the end of the world to table it. I would just say, kind of leave you with these 2 things. One, for the majority of this, for all the talk that we're having about trees, the majority of the corridor, we're with 30 feet, we have definitely included all the trees. And even in this section of quarry, we're really not talking about a huge differential impact, just because, as I mentioned earlier, and as Gabriella seconded that, just regrading this road to modern standards will require a lot of regrading in the hilly section adjacent to the quarry where we have a lot of wooded area. What's actually included in the project as far as cross-sectional elements will make little impact in the kind of delta between the grading limits between this green and orange line is kind of the best and worst case scenarios. I will note that there are some other options like removing medians or potentially regrading that to build walls or something like that could, but that's not typically included in a typical cross-section approval. So just kind of reframing this of, I guess what's before you guys is, here's a resolution on the typical section of the corridor for cross-sectional elements, and we'll have another chance to talk about some of the implications at specific locations about what this grading means and some of these elements, whether they should or should not be at specific locations. Does that make sense?
Yeah, could the grading be done to accommodate, for planning purposes, that to the south side especially, that 10-foot wide flat area before the slope begins? Is that a contingency area from what you mentioned for design decisions? Like if you move something over a little bit, either way, that gives you that, for planning purposes, it's there. Whether it's 9 feet in one place because a tree on the other side forces you to slightly move the road or something like that.
Yeah.
So is that the benefit of having that 10-foot area on the south, is that it gives you kind of fine-tuning flexibility on design decisions?
To some extent that we could dip into that, knowing that there's not current development that we have to tie into. If that would save trees, for example. So we could vary some of that width, but we want to make sure we're preserving a good section of that south side terrace for street trees to make sure that that's a somewhat level landing for them to grow.
I wouldn't mind approving, but with a huge caveat that this is
a lot.
Just to give, we're talking about pile of caveats here that, this is just to get the process moving forward, but whatever the decision point is for the next time, a lot of these questions that got brought up, need to be answered because of the unique aspects of this road. If it was just it's even more unique than the Lacie Road discussions that we had a couple of years ago here. The part to the east of the city hall. So, that was pretty intense there, but, that's pretty much a straight road in a sense, not the unique aesthetic aspects of a curved road with trees and so forth. So I would vote yes, but, with the caveat that something much better needs to be done on the things that we've discussed here before we proceed. So it's more of a courtesy vote to move the process forward, but it's definitely not an affirmation
Okay.
of anything yet. I mean, because to me, there's just too many open questions.
Yep. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And yeah, typically, like having, I can't say this enough, but the design, it's nice to have that so we can work through some of the details.
Sure.
Typically, we would just have that cross-section view, and that's what we'd be talking about.
Yeah,
So
it's a
nice.
catch-22
Exactly. At
process
some
in a
point, we'll have
sense.
to
You know,
get-
I'm asking you to tell me what the road's going to look like before I can really decide. Well, you can't make a decision on what the road might look like until I give you permission, so to speak.
Right.
Or the
And we'll-
city council more properly does to move forward. So I would vote yes, but as I mentioned, with those huge caveats.
Gotcha. And just to mention that, when we do like South Sain, for example, we won't be at this stage yet, so we'll just have that cross-section and maybe like 1 or 2 blocks where we'll actually have it laid out. So just kind of preface that so you guys know. Well, that's typically just because otherwise we have to lay out multiple, mile-long sections with different, right? So it gets tricky that way. But we definitely have some illustrative versions, and we can talk through what that should look like for you guys.
It's almost like we're looking for a VR type of
Right.
thing that we can play with on ourselves, and everybody can be like, so I mean, this is kind of boggles my mind that there's so many nuances and variances on this small section of road, but it's there.
Yep.
I don't see how we can avoid it.
In terms of a recommendation to council, it does sound like there's a majority of the committee that has an opinion about this particular resolution. It sounds like Rich, Bill, Darren, and Jason all are against this particular cross-section in favor of a larger cross-section. So, I mean, we could vote on this as is, because there seems to be an opinion about this particular cross-section. But it would be interesting if we were to vote on several different resolutions for different cross-sections. I feel like things might suss out differently, but, I mean, I'm certainly gonna tell the council to watch this before this comes back to council, because I think this discussion needs to be seen, in full, because there's a lot here. But, I don't know, I guess my preference is I sympathize with the buffered bike lanes. I understand that argument, but I guess my heart is a little bit more with the trees, and so I think that I appreciate the work that was done to create a compromise, and I also appreciate the perspective of wanting to go even smaller to save the trees. Although if I looked at that cross section, I don't know, I'd have to consider that separately, which is I guess why our neighbors are asking us to wait. But I mean, I do think that there seems to be an opinion that I'm hearing from the committee in terms of this particular resolution.
I saw that Sue was seeking to speak. I'm not the chairman. Can somebody recognize Sue to have a comment?
Go ahead, Sue.
Hi, yeah, a couple questions and then maybe a comment. Andrew, is the bike study that was referenced here in this discussion, is that part of the comprehensive plan for the city of Fitchburg?
Oh, are you talking about the 2017 bicycle
Yes.
pedestrian plan? I don't believe so. I think it's a standalone plan.
Okay, and then regarding just that stretch, it seems to me, as it exists, there's just a few mailboxes because there's just a few private residences that currently face it. 2 of those are sold now, the ones that are on the south side closest to Seminole Highway. And all the land, virtually all of it, is in the hands of, as far as I know, large developers. So I think the idea where we're going to have to be concerned about mail delivery or delivery vehicles won't exist, because any development that occurs would have any driveways in an internal subdivision funneling out into a neighborhood street or collector for the neighborhood, then attaching to Lacie Road. So with that in mind, then the reason for having roads a certain width or the entire roadway a certain width to make room for delivery vehicles might not be pressing at all. So it's just something, a thought of mine. Another question is where the gas lines were just, I think it's gas, Wisconsin Gas, or MG&E put some lines in on the north side of Lacie up through to Commerce Park Drive. Has there ever been a request or is there possible to locate the buffered bike lane on top of the gas easement, which would kind of give you more leeway in saving some trees? Because where the gas line is, the trees have all been taken down already. So then you, it changes the slope of the buffered bike lane, not quite as level with the road and climbing the hill, but I don't know if that's something reasonable to ask. So those are questions, comments, and thank you for allowing me to do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Yeah, if mail delivery is not an issue in the future, that issue would go away, but there still should be some, there's kind of two aspects. One is a clear zone. Even with curb and gutter, you would need some sort of a clear zone for errant vehicles, some flexibility, and those stopped and emergency stop vehicles, as well as construction. If any construction needs to occur, you know, whether that's a utility cut, then you're limited to, you know, to having a flag versus having some flexibility with keeping the two-way roadway operations open. So really, you know, just, you can't, unfortunately with curb and gutter, you really can't go outside of that with the travel lane. So, you know, you're kind of hemmed in. And so in that, we're kind of offering that flexibility for various things that should come up, like any road. And then kind of on the flip side, on the easement, I mean, we don't typically do that just because then we'd be kind of at the mercy of the utility. If they, you know, wanted to do whatever they wanted, then we would have to come back in and, you know, repair that. So it's not a typical practice for us to try to make arrangements like that.
When's the drop dead date, Andrew? You need a request approved by?
I mean, that's a good question. You know, I think looking like if we had the TPP approved by August, we would probably be still okay to get bids. That would, I guess, be the latest we could still get, you know, still get the project kicked off in 2022. So that would be, the cross section would be improved in the July meeting. So we probably have a month or two at best.
And I just want to say that, you know, whether we like it or not, there's developments on both sides of Lacie Road going from one side of it all the way down to the other side of it. So that road is going to become a major east to west thoroughfare with all the developments planned. And I want to help the environment too, and that's why I feel like getting as many cars off the road and as many people on bikes is the best way to help the environment.
Go ahead, Jake. Hope you're still on mute.
Sorry about that. I'm really glad we're having this dialogue tonight because this is, you know, there's a lot of competing factors at play here, and I think we're really sorting through them one by one. A couple of points about the development. While it may seem as though this is going to be developed, that may not in fact be the case because of the fact that on the north side of this road, the first half mile from Seminole is owned by Promega. Now, it's zoned industrial commercial. What they're going to do with it, who knows? And when they're going to do it, who knows? Then once you get to Commerce Park Drive, then you've got Payne and Dolan for almost another third of a mile at least, followed by Hammersley Stone, and then finally the developed subdivision, which can't really go further east until Hammersley is done. And those quarries still have capacity. On the south side, for the first half mile, you have the Fitchburg Minerals subdivision for which a comprehensive development plan was submitted and withdrawn to be resubmitted next month. And so there's a half mile there. And like Sue said, that's all going to be served internally. There's not going to be any frontage. And in fact, the preliminary plat that was part of the submittal shows that all those houses are, the back of the houses is facing Lacie, and the front and the street is, to the south. And then you have the Hammersley Stone staging area and active quarry that's, I think, maybe 800 feet wide at least. Then you have the Richardson property on top of the hill that just got sold for approximately a third to half a mile. And then you've got that's probably a little more, it's more than a quarter, yeah, it's maybe a third. And then you have the O'Brien property, which Edgewood wants to buy. So the access to this road can be really restricted by the city. They are going to put in 2 intersections plus that intersection, in theory, where Hammersley operation will cross into Payne and Dolan's operation. But I think we know that this is going to develop, but I think we need to be aware of the kind of development that's going to occur and factor that in. I'm really glad we've had this because it's going to give me a lot to think about. And when I wake up tomorrow morning, I'll be thinking about what we talked about today, because there was a lot of good information exchanged here. And I did have one other point. One of the alternatives that we've suggested be evaluated is no curb, for several reasons. One of which is, if there's no curb, you then have the ability to not be constricted by it if you have an emergency. And the other part of this discussion, I think, still will ultimately come back to the question of what is the difference between this road and Whalen Road, as an example, the next road to the south that intersects with Seminole. Now, Whalen obviously is in a rural area, and I think it's only 9 feet wide, except for maybe a few improvements that may. This road right now is only 18 feet wide in the paved surface. There's maybe 1 foot gravel shoulders. So I think there's some opportunities here, and I think we can still converge on something. We're just gonna have to keep the thinking hats on and work through it. But I did have one final question. Andrew, if this was completed today, if this was approved today by this group and Public Works tomorrow and the council next Monday, how much expense would be incurred to develop the TPP? Because essentially what I'm hearing here is that you can't proceed with work to prepare the TPP until you have got this approval. Now, the earliest, theoretically, the earliest that can occur is April 27th, the next council meeting. And if it was approved, but you can't, just because this group approves it today doesn't mean that you can direct the consultants to start incurring money to prepare the TPP. And I would be the first to say that once a typical cross-section or multiple typical cross-sections are approved, I think that the train's left the station. The city isn't going to want to redo well, maybe they would for various reasons, but generally they would want to avoid having to redo the TPP, because that starts the right-of-way acquisition process once that's approved. But it's going to cost some money to do that. So Andrew, do you have an estimate of what it'll take to get from approval of the typical cross-section to submittal of the TPP to the council and the standing committees?
Do you mean in terms of time?
No, in terms of money.
I don't have an estimate for that. But I would certainly say that's the justification for why we want this to go in a sequential order, that we want to make sure we're locking in kind of the elements so that we can have that be consistent, and we can just start to kind of fine tune what the kind of grading limits and what some of our options are there, if that makes sense. So yeah, so to your point, I am trying to hold off on telling the consultant to to kind of lay out a fully graded new cross-section design on the corridor until we have this approved, or at least until it's through, Board of Public Works with approval. And so that's kind of why this is critical to get some of those more revised, fine-tuned, and as during our advisory group meeting, as noted, some of that stuff, depending upon if we cut into the road versus fill and kind of where it lies on the current existing grades, that has a lot of effect on what the grading limits are. So we don't want to do that for 4 cross sections. That's not typically what we do. That would be 4 times what a typical project would be, so. Or 3.5 times, right? There's some of that kind of work, but we don't want to get too far along with it, knowing that we have to redo it all. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying.
So, yeah, so again, that's why we're trying to get that, at least this element kind of squared away so we can fine tune, if that's helpful, for the TPP.
So our options kind of tonight are to pass or not pass the resolution as is, or someone makes another motion for a new resolution that is offered, or we table this completely and it's going to go on. It's still going to go on. If we table this, it's still going to go on to the Public Works and then to the council. And so, and we just wouldn't make an official recommendation from this commission. That is that. I assume that's the way that would work. It would still move on, but they may still pass whatever they may please, regardless of what we say. At this, I mean, we're always advisory to the council, but I mean, they could still move forward even without us. They can always, disagree with what we recommend as well. So there's been a lot of good discussion. It is a unique road, so I don't know. It's kind of a tough call, I think, to vote on anything tonight.
Say, Darren, this is Rich. I'll make a motion that we table this for 1 month or till next month's meeting.
Just as a matter of process, we have a motion on the table to do this.
Okay.
So we should vote on that, I suppose.
Yeah, following the official Robert's Rules of Order, I assume that we have to do that since we have it on the table already.
Yes, because it's already been moved and seconded, so we would have to either vote it up or vote it down.
Can't somebody move to amend the motion that's on the table? And then vote on the amended motion?
Sure.
Yeah, it's always in order to make a motion to amend.
But you can make a motion to amend it, but what about making a motion to not vote on it? I'm not sure if that's.
I mean, I think we can you could refer it to council without a recommendation. I'm pretty sure that there is an option to a committee. I also think that we could, I can't remember who moved it, but we could rescind it and move to table it to the next meeting. I think all those are options on the table, but we might need to rescind the motion if we wanted to table it. But I think everything's on the table, but in terms of what our choices are. And you could move it without a recommendation. I know the finance committee's done that before.
Yeah, my incline is to move it on without a recommendation as well because of the, it's hard to say, but I'm in favor of moving the process along without making a recommendation, if that makes sense.
So essentially that if we kill this now, then that's what we're doing, right? Because we're not recommending it.
Yeah, we can cancel it, but if we move it, if we, I guess if we did pass the motion, we did defeat it, which would occur, I guess, in several ways if everybody abstains, I guess. I've never seen that situation, but I think we're in favor of the process, but not the selection, so I'm not quite sure exactly how you do that with Robert's rule.
I think if we vote to not approve this, it would proceed on its merry way and go to whoever else is on the list to review it, and it would go to the council. And the council at that time could act to approve it if they wanted, or they could ask to send it back through the mill again for further consideration. But there'd be some clarity, I think, if we voted either up or down on this specific motion.
Right.
I do agree that voting on this particular motion provides some clarity for council, and I'll be there to contextualize it for the council, and I'll encourage everyone in advance to review it, and I'll send this to the alder that's going to be chairing Public Works, the new Public Works alder, so that he can take a look at this before Public Works.
Well, I think earlier I had suggested I made a motion to amend the alternate plan to include buffered bike lanes. So I will make the motion again. If there's a second, great. If there's not, then the amendment dies. But I would move to accept Andrew's alternate plan with the amendment of buffered bike lanes.
I second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Not in favor?
Nay.
Nay.
Nay. Nay.
Should we do a roll call?
Or probably should. Yeah, I think it's 3-3, but you want to do a roll call, aye or nay? I'll say aye.
I'll say aye.
I said aye.
I said nay.
I said nay.
Rich said nay.
I said aye.
That's 3-3.
What did you say, Bill?
I said aye.
You said aye?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think, or is it 4-3? I think it's 4-3.
Oh, because Rich said aye.
No, Rich
I said nay.
Troy said aye. I said aye.
Oh.
Jason and Bill.
It's 4-3 then, yeah.
So the amended resolution passes then with the buffered bike lane. I do hope that as we've had discussions that, you know, obviously it's going to go on from here, but I do want as much consideration as we can take into account for the mature trees along the road and anything we could do to mitigate water issues or, you know, anything from an engineering standpoint, as you mentioned, Andrew. So hopefully that can be carried forward to the other committees in the council.
We respect that the council can decide differently. You know, this is just a proposal.
Exactly. Yep. We're advisory to the council, so they can. Yeah.
That's great, Gabriella, that you've been here for this robust conversation, so you can really fill them in on all aspects of it.
Yep, and like I said, I will provide context when I explain what happened here, but I'll also encourage everyone to watch this because I think this is an important like baseline for that discussion will happen in council.
Gabriella, I just want you to know that I'm on the fine line of this amendment and the resolution itself. I mean, there's no pin sharp enough for me to balance on this issue because I don't think I'm going to rely on you to give the sense. To me, that's the real benefit of you being on this committee is I think you're our real report to the council, because you're a person who was there, participated. So my vote, either way, and our vote, I don't think in this issue, because of the huge number of stakeholders and their perspectives. I'm going to trust and rely on you to be my representative in more ways than one.
Sounds good.
I just wanted to mention, Jay, when I was talking about development, I was actually referring to all the development way on the east side of Fitchburg, all the way down by Syene. There's a lot of residential going in there, and they're gonna end up using Lacie Road as an overflow, and McKee is congested, and you're gonna see a lot more bikers too.
Thanks for that clarification. I'm really glad you made it, because that was not something I was thinking of when you made the remark.
Real quick, we made a motion to amend the motion that was on the table. Do we actually need to approve that motion that was on the table?
No.
Well, I think because, let's see, who made the original motion?
I
Is it,
But
I
but I
did.
think that's right. I think we have to vote on the amended motion.
if the motion, I believe, if the amendment was made by the original people making the motion, you don't have to vote on the amendment.
All right, let's roll with that then.
But I could be mistaken.
No, I think we still have to vote. We voted on the amendment, and I think we still have to vote on the main motion as amended.
Yeah, we need to vote now on the new revised motion with the amendment incorporated.
Okay, so it's still in essence, it's resolution R6121, approving a typical section for the Lacie Road reconstruction project from Fitchburg Road to Seminole Highway, amended with buffered bike lanes. We'll do a roll call.
We just did that one, didn't we? We got to go back to the original motion, right?
Yeah.
We need, you're saying we need to,
I thought we'd finish the
Vote on the
first deal
original
and then
motion,
we'd go
yeah,
back
'cause
and
we did
and do
the-
the
'cause we
amended
did the
one since
amended.
it's been made, yeah.
No, you stated it correctly, Darren. I think we need to vote on the original motion as amended. That's what we need to vote on now.
Yeah, so if we accept this, if you vote yes, you're voting yes for this plan plus buffered bike lanes.
Okay.
We're no longer voting on what was originally presented, but what was just amended by the majority of the committee.
okay. I vote yes.
Yes.
Yes?
No.
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 All right. There's no pinhead here. I'm going to vote no.
Okay, the resolution that does not pass, 4-3. The next item on the agenda is report from the department. Anything else, Andrew, new developments?
Yeah, so Fish Hatchery Road, we got the traffic switched over to the western lanes, the southbound lanes. That was done yesterday, so now that traffic's switched over and we'll be doing that through July. So if you have any questions on that, feel free to let me know. We're also kicking off the East Sherrill project next week. I'll just really quickly share my screen there. Specifically at Woods Hollow Road, we're putting some bulb outs in, and so that'll be kicking off on Monday, and we'll also be repaving East Sherrill Parkway along the limits of the project. And so those are two, I'll show you the quick limits. I guess those are two projects, and then South Syene, the design work continues. So I met with some residents out on the block between So this is the full limits of pavement, so we'll be repaving that. Just a mill and overlay. And then, so I met with the South Side residents today to talk a little bit more about specifically the cross-section on that block. And so we're making some progress, kind of working through some of the options there with the folks who would use it kind of most. And so we'll kind of come up with pros and cons and a recommendation there. We're starting to form a larger advisory group for all of kind of South Side to talk generally about the project, and then kind of going to be taking what we learned there, similar to West Lacie, to you guys. So I'll look for that probably either next month or in June. So, yep, those are the big things. Thanks. Sorry, Darren, can't hear you.
Sorry. You mentioned our next meeting would be do you think it'd be the regular time in May? At this point,
Yep, that works.
okay. Any announcements? If not, I do have one announcement. This is my final meeting on the TTC. I've come to the end of my second 3-year term. I've decided to transition off the commission and let somebody else have a chance. I've really enjoyed doing this for the time I've been on in my role, and especially coming on during the planning of the last bike and pedestrian plan, and being with the working on the working group with that, and being on that committee. It's been a good journey for me, and I will certainly consider city service in the future, but I'm going to take a pause right now and just say thanks to all of you for working. Really appreciate working with you and Andrew and other city staff and all the alders and the mayors that I've worked under. And I will still certainly probably be weighing in with this committee on other issues and things transportation wise. So I still have a good interest in that area. So again, I just want to thank everyone and wish you all well in the future.
Thanks, Darren. Good work. We'll miss you.
6
Thanks so much for your
years.
service, Darren.
Thank you.
I guess point of order, will we need to do an election for a chair at the next meeting then too?
Yeah.
Add that to the agenda.
If there are no other announcements, would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The meeting is adjourned. Have a great rest of your week, everyone.
Thank you.
You too.